In this news review, we're going to be talking about the Russia-Africa Summit. We're going to also be talking about Ethiopia and its looming debt issue. And finally, we're going to be looking at BRICS and how it's going to shape the world as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. So our first story is just a review of the big items from the Russia-Africa Summit, which was held in St. Petersburg. So two key things came out of that summit, and those were that Russia is going to write off some of Africa's debt, and also it's promising to give grains. So some key things about the grain deal is that 6 African countries are going to get that grain deal, or free grain. So according to this news article, those countries are going to be Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, Eritrea, and Central African Republic. And they're going to spread out they're going to give that grain out over the next 3 to 4 months. And it's only going to be 50,000 tons of grain, which is quite small if you think about it in the terms of the size of the population. If you combine all those 6 countries all together, which is quite tiny. It's interesting that Burkina Faso and Mali are in that. And I'm going to talk about that in a separate video when I'm going to cover the Niger coup. When I cover the Niger coup, which is an interesting story in itself. So that's one of the big deals that they've made out of this, is that they're going to give this grain to these 6 African countries. To me, it sounds like just a nice way of trying to coax these African countries to sort of show Russia has still got some legacy ties, particularly if you look back historically. Russia helped Zimbabwe with its liberation movement in terms of giving them arms and training and the like. So they're just doing something that are trying to shore up that relationship that they've had in the past. So it's very small, the grain deal. It's not going to be something that is going to make a big dent on. It's not going to make a big dent on the economies of those 6 African countries, because it depends on who gets what. But it's something that Russia thought it would be a nice deal to do. So we'll see how that sort of plays out in that economic relationship between Russia and those African countries. What will be interesting to find out is whether this deal will also mean that there's something that these African countries need to give to Russia. Will it be preferential treatment in terms of trade? Will Russian companies be able to set up shop and factories and mines more easily because they're sort of trying to sweeten this deal, which would be interesting in itself? Because as part of because both these deals, the grain deal and the trade write-off deal, it's not a free lunch. I don't think it's something that Putin is just doing just to say, here you go, I'm just going to be a nice guy. You can do it with no pro quo or any sort of exchange for anything else. I think he's just setting it up for Russia to come out of the sanction regime that they're facing at the moment. So if it can increase trade with Africa, and it will help Russia in a sense, because they send Africa the things they need. Russian businesses can set up in Africa and help trade and keep their economy going. So the key sticking point for Russia in doing this strategy is that there's still a lot of trade that is done by the dollar, and I don't know if they've access to it, and also that they're sort of been isolated from the world financial systems. So it'll be interesting how they use this alliance that they're trying to build with Africa to help them with their economic issues due to the sanctions caused by the Russia-Ukraine war. So that'll be an interesting one, but it's interesting to see these dynamics play out and how people can use economics, pretty much use money to sort of show up that position, change that position in the way they are positioned within the global economy. And Russia is trying to create a multipolar world where it can be not so affected by the moves that America makes, because if you do not know, US has got is a major player in terms of trade. Even if it's not trading with African countries directly, more than 80% of trade is done with the US dollar. So US has got a huge power in terms of dictating how other world economies function. And that's one of the reasons why de-dollarization is a big issue and something that a lot of countries are interested in. The next story we're going to talk about is going to be the BRICS summit that is coming up very shortly, and at the end of August 22 to 24, So I'll be keeping watch to see what will be coming out of that forum. And I forgot to say about the previous story, I didn't want to look at more at what was talked about in the Russia Africa summit, but I was not able to because most of the sessions were in Russian, or the sessions that were interesting to me were in Russian, so I couldn't really go a little bit deeper in terms of that summit. But hopefully with the BRICS summit, I'll be able to go a little bit deeper. Hopefully there'll be some more English sessions so I can dig into those and give you guys some interesting, or my thoughts and findings from those sessions. So anyway, so BRICS summit is coming up in South Africa. Putin said he's not coming. It looks like India might not come as well. Also, the president of India, so Modi, or Prime Minister of India. Anyway, Modi might not come because of the India-China conflict. On top of that, there's a lot of interest by many other countries to become full-time members of BRICS. So about more than 20 have submitted or some sort of request to be part of BRICS. So the BRICS alliance is kind of gaining a little bit of steam here. There's some things that are going to be important for this BRICS alliance to actually have economic teeth. First, they need to figure out what sort of currency they'll use for trade, because this economic alliance is only going to be powerful if there's actually a currency that kind of helps them bypass the US dollar. Just like I said in the Russia-Africa summit story summary, which I just gave before, because most of the world trade is done using the US dollar, because it was made the reserve currency at that time during the Bretton Woods. Now, this BRICS organization or coalition is trying to create a sort of a separate economic world that they can use another currency. So it'll be interesting for these countries, particularly the Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and South Africa, to decide which currency would they use for BRICS, and how would they do it? How would they set up the infrastructure to make BRICS happen? There's a lot of opportunities now to make a BRICS currency happen compared to maybe 10 or 20 years ago, because now there's blockchain, there's digital currencies, and the world has become more digital. Setting up a new financial system based on digitization of how you do transactions is quite possible and could be the best route for them, and might make this BRICS alliance become more powerful if they can sort of get a currency happening. But as well, another thing that's critical for this BRICS thing to even work out and to be beneficial for these 20 or so people member countries that want to become members is that the core BRICS countries need to be able to be on the same page. At the moment, they all have their own national interests that they're going for. China wants to be more influential in the world. India doesn't want China to be more influential in the world. South Africa is just still finding its feet, and it has a lot of issues. I think they're just trying to score points on the board so that the economy can become stronger. Brazil doesn't want to risk its relationships with Europe and particularly the US because they are close neighbors to the US. All these countries are not on the same page, and it'll be interesting to see if they can get on the same page, because if they can't get on the same page, this BRICS thing might just become something we'll look back at as a kind of a fad, or something that was just, brouhaha, just trying to sort of, push the US out of the way, but didn't eventuate to anything. So it'll be interesting to see what their plans are, and I'll be really keen to hear what they do talk about during that summit between the 22nd and the 24th. And I want to dig my teeth into that. So watch for this space when that week comes around and I get a chance to look at that. I'll let you guys know my thoughts. So the last story I want to talk about is Ethiopia. So Ethiopia has had an interesting few years. It had to fight a civil war over the last couple of years, and then it's still recovering from that. And then on top of that, there was COVID, and now the Russia-Ukraine war has also made things more difficult for Ethiopia. So Ethiopia, like many other African countries, uses debt to be able to develop their country. Sometimes, like many other African countries, they might not make such good decisions around what they decide to use those borrowings for, but I give them grace. If I was in that position, would I act differently? That's a question everyone should ask themselves before they judge Africa. But I guess the key things for Ethiopia is that they're under pressure right now to be able to meet that debt obligations. They've asked for help from the IMF, and the IMF is still sort of contemplating about what they're going to do. And I did make a video on the IMF if anyone is interested in that, talking about whether the IMF is good or evil. So the IMF is going to give a loan, or they're hoping to get a loan of about $2 billion. But that loan is not going to be enough because they'll still have a shortfall of about $4 billion. And if they don't get those funds through other means, Ethiopia might go into default, which is going to have major consequences for the country. Ethiopia has got about 3 years or so to figure out what they're going to do. So these are the options that Ethiopia might have to choose from. You could do what President Ruto has done from Kenya, is to do the revenue raising round. So increase taxes, broaden the tax base, try and get more trade deals with different countries, that sort of thing. The other option, or even de-dollarize as best as they can, so they don't have so much pressure on their foreign reserves, and they can use those reserves to pay off the debt and also shore up their own currency. The other option is privatization, which might be where the IMF might lean towards, because most of the time these loans are conditional, which I also talked about in that video. So they might, IMF or even Ethiopia, out of its own volition, might have to privatize national assets. So those could be different things. It could be anything that could be from electrical assets, transport assets, anything that the government owns. It might need to cut on public service in terms of what it provides to the public, who is employed by public service. So it's going to be very a tricky few years for Ethiopia. So if they really don't want to get into default, they need to really act fast on this. Otherwise, 2026 will come in a blink of an eye, and we'll be seeing Ethiopia with protests or some sort of major issues economically and socially, because if they go into default, that also brings a lot of ramifications, because it'll make their debt repayments even higher. They might be pushed to do those cuts into public service, increase taxes, and make life more painful for people, which will likely cause social unrest and make people not happy. And they've already just faced a war, and having economic unrest or problems can make those tensions kind of rise again, which we really don't want. For the Ethiopian leadership, it's going to be really critical in the next 3 years, and also getting this deal will be really critical for them. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Really, what I think one of the things that they should be working on in the long term is really trying to make the private sector more productive, and really support the small to medium sized enterprises, because those small to medium sized enterprises are less likely to have these issues in terms of, big dollar corruption, where you've got these major projects and there can be all the shadiness happening within these major projects that cause corruption to be easily to be sneaked in, and then that major project might have lots of funds diverted away and have no real impact. Then you are in a worse off position because you have not created the asset that will generate revenue. So I think the real thing that the Ethiopian leadership needs to work on is trying to really prop up the private sector, the Ethiopian citizens to be more productive, to be business owners, to be job creators, so that they can generate revenue through that avenue. 3 years is a short time, but 3 years can make a big difference if people are given the financial capital and access to funds to put those business ideas that are in their minds to become reality. Because there's a lot of opportunity in Africa, there's a lot of underdevelopment, and I think if the government really sort of sees that the opportunity to raise up its own citizens, it could see a massive change. It might not fix their immediate problems, but it could really change the dynamic over a period of a decade. So that's it, guys, for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you're new to this channel, my name is Abe. Please make sure to subscribe down below to check out more videos like this. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.